Hi, this is Eternal King bringing you another LOR video today. Long time no talk. I wanted to discuss the recent announcement of Rotation 2.0. So for those that know me, I've never been a big fan of Standard, but I am a big fan of card design in card games and balanced design. And I want to discuss a little bit about what it is Rotation 2.0 is trying to accomplish, why it matters, and why it may in fact be good for Standard as a format as opposed to bad. So for those that don't know, I've always held the position that Standard failed to properly differentiate itself as a format in LOR. And the example that I like to use is Demacia. So Demacia card piles, specifically Morgana Eddy card piles, are the best decks that you can play in Standard. They are also some of the best decks that you can play in Eternal. The only difference being that in Eternal you have the tools available to you to counter these decks to keep their win rate percentages in a healthy range, kind of that 56% range. You can keep them down in Eternal because you have control tools, because you have combo tools, because you have alt win cons, because you have all these things that can blow out the Eddy linear play a bunch of beef style of deck. There's a million things you can run into, Morgana formidable, Eddy card piles. You can run Jace Lux, for example, and that's going to feel fine a lot of the time because you have the tools to control them out. The problem arises in the Standard format where those tools simply do not exist. What it means is that the Eddy card pile can essentially reign as king of the hill with zero competition. There is no flocks to kill the formidable units, right? There's no disintegrates, there's no blighted ravines and Freljord, there's just nothing. There's simply nothing, right, to deal with Morgana Galio. It doesn't exist. And the other example I like to use is Anti-Aggro. So Anti-Aggro being the top aggro deck in Standard. In Eternal, not a problem at all. It's just a aggro deck in a sea of other aggro decks, and most likely not even the best aggro deck. But in Standard, it is the best deck. It won the last Runeterra Open, the last tournament of LOR that we will ever have, and it won handedly, and it won without competition, and it won without surprise. And it did that because the cards did not exist to counter the archetype. So now that takes us to Rotation 2.0. So I've established my position. Basically, the best decks in Standard are only the best decks because Rotation 1.0 essentially removed the necessary answers to counter these lists without actually removing the best decks from the game, which is the whole point of Rotation. Rotation in MTG, the idea being that you're basically trying to reduce the height of the power curve so that the best decks are not the best decks, they're just not allowed in the format. What ended up happening, instead of reducing the height of the format, they reduced the width of the format. Right? The power curve was still as high as it used to be, the best decks were still the best decks, but you had fewer answers for them. It was literally the opposite of what Standard is supposed to be in any other card game like MTG. So what they're doing now is they're playing catch up with Rotation 2.0. What they're doing is that every single region that exists in the game, and I'll use the example of Bilgewater, they're now committing to the bit, right? Lurk is another one of the best aggro decks that has existed in Standard and has been one of the best aggro decks every single season of Standard. It never went anywhere. It was an institution because, again, attacking every turn and making your units really big is essentially uncounterable in Standard. The tools simply do not exist. So what they're doing is they're removing Pike. That's the only logical thing to do in Standard if you want to make Standard a proper format, is you have to commit to reducing the height of the power curve, not just the width. You have to reduce the height. The best decks cannot continue to be the best decks in Standard. It's just, the Standard as a format does not function that way. It's great for the players who love just grinding out the best decks, like what is my win rate of Lurk into Anti-Aggro? And then they just want to play that for the rest of time in LOR, and it's like, that's great, but that's not a format. That's a tournament matchup table. It's not a format of a card game. It just isn't. So yeah, you remove the Pike. You remove all the best cards that remain in the standard format to reduce the height of the power curve, right? So, TF got rotated early on in 1.0. What's left for us to rotate? Well, we could get rid of Fizz, right? We can get rid of Misfortune. Those cards were still there. We can get rid of the Eloy, right? That's still there. So that's what they're doing, is they're committing to the bit. Remove the Gangplank, because the Gangplank's still there. They're committing to reducing the height of the format. You can leave Jax. Jack's not going to do anything in Standard. So you can leave the Jack, right? And so that applies to followers as well, right? Crackshot Corsair is getting rotated. Well, why is Crackshot Corsair getting rotated? Because it has to hit anti-aggro. Because anti-aggro can't remain being the best deck in Standard for the end of time. So that's what they're doing, is that if LOR is going to continue to exist long-term as a card game, they need to make Standard an actual format and not just pro players basically picking and choosing their favorite matchup tables, which is what the format started out as. It started off with Majin Bey saying that, hey, here are all the decks I don't like playing against. I don't like playing against Ramp. I don't like playing against Combo. I don't like playing against weird value grindy matchups. I don't like playing against Jace Lux. These are the decks I think that I don't want to run into. I just want to grind my matchup tables. That's not a format. That's Riot basically choosing besties. So they're committing to it now, and there's going to be some frustration, definitely among the players. The fact that the LOR devs have acknowledged that lurk is strong enough to be an eternal deck. It is. It's an eternal deck. Lurk is an eternal deck. It does not belong in Standard. Mid-range Plunder is an eternal deck. It does not belong in Standard. Spawn, like Eloy Spawn, Tentacles, is a eternal deck. It does not belong in Standard. Misfortune Pirate Aggro is an eternal deck. It does not belong in Standard. And that's what they're doing. So whether or not you enjoy these changes, you have to respect the changes, because they're doing what they should have done the first time around, which is, instead of choosing besties, you diminish the power curve equally across the entire board of cards in the format. Nora's another great example. That Nora should never have been left alive in Standard, not in a million years. Her power curve is she's such a value grindy piece in a format without answers that it's insane that she was left untouched. And it was no surprise that she was your go-to control champion for a good part of time in the format. Ashe LeBlanc midrange was one of the best decks in Standard for many seasons. And you have to be even about it. Remove the Gnar with its ability to pull the Pokestick. Gnar's gone now. You have to be consistent. Ornn. They're getting rid of weapon decks in Standard. And you have to, because Jack's Ornn is an eternal deck. It's an eternal deck that was Standard legal, so of course it was one of the best decks in the game. You have to be even and consistent when you're diminishing a power curve in a format. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now. So again, I wanted to give you a little insight into what it is the devs are doing. Even something like Omen Hawk, right? Omen Hawk into Doggo is an eternal power scale play sequence. You simply play the Omen Hawk, and then you play Doggo on 2, and you shuffle in so much board stats that the opponent in Standard, specifically Snowdog, so you play Omen Hawk and you play Snowdog, that is an eternal power scale sequence of cards. It is exceptionally powerful to essentially say to the opponent, okay, all my cards have 2/2 for the rest of the game now. Effectively speaking, you just, the next 4 cards that I draw have 2/2 in them. Or at least, 2/2 and then 1/1 or what have you. It's a lot of value to shuffle into your deck in Standard specifically. So they're just no, you don't get to do that anymore. Well, yeah, you have to do that because Standard has to be its own thing. You can't just say, okay, Snowdog's okay because the pro players think it's a good card. It's no duh, it's a good card. Of course Omen Hawk into Snowdog is a good sequence of cards. It's so powerful that it's eternal viable. Not just eternal viable, you can build an entire deck around it. So that's what's happening, essentially, is that Riot is saying, okay, First time, we just took out the cards that pro players didn't like. We took out the flocks, we took out the disintegrates, we took out most of the control tools, we took out a lot of the, non-standard champions, like, I don't mean standard in terms of the format, but I mean like strange champions like Tom Kench eating things. We took out all the stuff that was in the game. We took out healing decks, right? Like alt win cons, like landmark flipping and instantly winning the game. We took out all this stuff that was weird, and pro players didn't like it because it didn't fit in well into their matchup tables and made them look bad at the game. We took out all that stuff first time around. It didn't work. It didn't work because it wasn't heavy-handed enough. If you're going to make standard different than Eternal, you can't just pick and choose your favorites and your besties. You have to gut the power curve. You take it and you take a machete and you split the power curve in half. And anything that's left, that's standard legal. And that's what they're doing now. So if you're sad that you don't get to play Lurk in standard anymore for the next the rest of time in terms of the life cycle of LOR, I got news for you. Too damn bad. Okay? If you want to play real LOR, go run Pike in Eternal and see what it's like to play against a real decks. Much like Lurk. Because again, Lurk is a real deck. So you have a 50-50 chance of winning the game if you play Lurk in Eternal. Because you're going to get Mystic Shotted and Flocked and pinged and controlled out. And you'll have to actually play the game on even footing. You're not just grinding Lurk into anti-aggro. And if you want to play anti-aggro, go play it in Eternal and see how that goes for you. Because I bet you I will kick your butt with Ziggs Poppy. Just no problem at all. I'll kick your butt with a million different things. I'll happily beat you with Jace Lux to control you out, and you won't even get to play the game. And it's not because, Jace Lux is better than anti-aggro. No, they're even on the power scale. But you just forgot what it's like to play on an even power scale. We're not choosing besties anymore. We're not choosing favorites. Everything is even. In Eternal, everything is even because everything is legal. In Standard, everything is equal because nothing. Everything is even because nothing is legal. That is the essential idea. In Standard, you got everything. In Eternal, everything is permitted. Those are the two formats of LOR for the rest of time. And it's the only way to even out the power scaling. Alright, this is Eternal King signing out. I just wanted to discuss Standard 2.0, why the Riot devs are doing what they're doing, and why they probably should have done it in the first place. For the first time ever, I might actually play some Standard, because there's actual viability to the format being its own thing, as opposed to just a playground where a small number of best decks get to do their thing. This is Eternal King signing out.